I'm Howard Chiersky, the author of Winning Digital Customers, a book that I assume you have because this video is a supplement to the book, and it is talking about the execution gap model, which we slipped into the book with little explanation. And to be perfectly honest, this book is at 400 pages, the book you purchased. It used to be about 550 pages at one point in draft mode. And our editor just became an absolute bear on us to say we've got to take some material out of this book to get it down to reasonable length. So unfortunately, the explanation of the execution gap model is something that we could not include in the book for space reasons. We did include the diagram thinking, well, maybe you can figure it out on your own, and maybe you can. But if you're watching this video, I'm guessing you were looking for a little more insight into it, which is what I am here to provide you. So let's take a look at the execution gap model. What's it for, first of all? It's for situations where things didn't go quite right. And that's going to be most of the time, right? When you're trying to innovate, when you're trying to develop new products, when you're trying to improve a customer journey, you're going to wind up trying a lot of things. And I can assure you that most of them won't be perfect the first time. There's going to be some kind of a gap. Meaning, you didn't completely get the outcome you were hoping for. Maybe it was a total disaster, or maybe it just didn't quite get the level of acceptance or love that you were hoping for when you launched that new app, or created that new marketing campaign, or built a new website, or added a Alexa skill so that people could access their customer orders, or whatever it was that you did. And so one of the things that we're always trying to do is figure out, well, okay, how could we be as effective as possible in these types of situations? And we realized that there are some different reasons why things don't go well when we launch a product. And it kind of led us to develop this thing we call the execution gap model. So first of all, it's really just a method of trying to analyze where's the problem. So the top of the diagram you see is intent. So intent is, it says, as it says in the diagram, what we meant it to be. In other words, we created this new thing for a reason. Right? And if you're going through this process to kind of do a retrospective on something you've launched, write it down, right? What was the reason? What were you trying to achieve? And what were the results? What would be the way of telling whether you've achieved those results? Meaning, if I created a new feature to make it easier for people to order toner for their printers on my office supply website, what was I hoping to achieve? Well, I was hoping that a lot of people who ordered toner would use this tool. I was hoping that they would have a high level of satisfaction so that if I polled them afterwards, they would say, oh my God, this is so much of an easier way to order toner. I was hoping we'd sell more toner as a result of having this tool. Stuff like that. And the other part of intent is, what was the intention of the experience? Well, I wanted it to be 3 clicks. I wanted it to be able to automatically detect the printers that were connected to your computer without you having to type them in, and therefore be able to tell you exactly what toner type you needed. I wanted to be able to then have you decide on which brand you wanted and show you the prices, and then have it automatically be sent to you, with instructions on how to install it in your printer. And I wanted people to be able to do that in under 30 seconds, for example, right? This is the vision. That vision could go all the way to the designs you had, the wireframes or the screen designs. Your vision, if you closed your eyes and you said, when the customer interacts with this, here's how I want it to go. And then, of course, connect that to what I said earlier about intent. Here's how I want the customer to respond. This is what we mean by intent, right? So if you're using this model, it's probably because you didn't quite get your intent in some way or another. Because if you got your intent, then there's no gap, right? And if you did, congratulations, that's fantastic. But as I said before, usually there is some level of gap. So let's talk about the other parts of the diagram. So if we go look to the right, if you look in the lower right, you see it says experience. What actually happened? Now, it's very important that we know this. In other words, we may know that not a lot of people are using our new toner feature, for example, but what really happens when people try to use it? Why aren't they using it? What is their experience? Sometimes we don't know. And if we don't know, then we're not really ready to fully use this model. We got to go find out. We got to know what goes in that bubble. First, we're going to document the intent, make sure we're really clear. We probably had something in mind, but maybe we never documented and made it clear, which, by the way, if you didn't, it's possibly part of your problem and not being absolutely clear. But, after the fact, at least, let's document what our clear intent is, and then let's make sure we can document what really happened. Meaning, when people used the toner tool that you created, for example, maybe a bunch of them, when it tried to detect the type of printer that they had, it couldn't detect it, and it came back with an error. Maybe there's other people who it detected the printer, but it was wrong, and therefore it had them order the wrong kind of toner. Or maybe it worked and it detected the printer, but it took 20 minutes to detect the printer, and so people got frustrated because it was so slow. Or maybe there are some things that were great about how that worked, right? In any case, what is it that actually happened when customers went through the experience? And by the way, if you're not sure how to determine that, there's plenty of stuff in the book, particularly the chapter on direct customer research, that goes into detail on ways that you can assess and understand through heuristics or through observational research and other things, all talked about in the book, to really get clear on that. So you want to make sure you're clear. And then if there's a gap there, and by the way, that might not be where your gap is, but you may have a gap where you say, oh, well, here's how I meant it to work, the perfect version of the product, but here's how it actually worked. And the difference between those is your execution gap, meaning you have an intent, and if you execute the intent exactly right, the experience is exactly what you meant it to be, then that's 100% perfect execution. Rarely do we have 100% perfect execution. But whatever that gap is, large or small, that's what we call the execution gap. So it's helpful to understand part of the problem may very well be the execution gap. And in fact, we call this the execution gap model, but actually there's several other gaps as well. But we consider this very often one of the most important gaps. Let's look at the other circle here. The expectation. What is it that the customer wanted? So sometimes we execute something that's consistent with our intention. Maybe we have little to no execution gap and the customer still doesn't like it because maybe it doesn't actually deliver what it was the customer wanted. So the first question is, do we know what the customer wanted? Did we know before we built the product? Or if we didn't know then, we need to find out now. This product is not working. So we need to understand if customers are ordering toner, what kind of experience do they want? What outcome are they looking for? What information do they need? What are the things that would make for them a perfect experience? You may not be able to ask a customer and say, what features do you want? Because often customers don't know. But by using, again, techniques described in the book, like observational research, you can learn and observe and understand and gain empathy for a customer to learn what is the pain, what are the challenges and problems they have when they order toner. Believe me, there's plenty of pain and challenges when dealing with reordering the toner cartridge for your printer, absolutely. And I can tell you that even if I don't know in your particular situation what exact problems your customers are trying to solve or what pain they're in, I can tell you one thing, whatever the pain is, they want to minimize the pain. That's for sure. So if you can go out and find the pain and understand the pain that your customers are in, understand that their expectation is to minimize that pain as much as possible. And as we've talked about in other places, if it's pain that they blame you for, then you're relieving blame pain, and that's going to reduce their negative feelings towards you. And if it's inconvenience that they have, but they don't blame you for because they say, oh, well, it's reasonable that I need to be able to know the model number of my printer, and it's not an office supply company's fault that it's printed in little tiny type embossed on a metal plate all the way behind the back of my printer, so I have to turn the whole printer around and get a magnifying glass and crouch down and try to read it in little tiny silver type on a silver background to try to figure out what that model number says, right? But I don't blame you, Staples or Office Depot or whatever. In any case, but nevertheless, what a nuisance, right? What a nuisance. And if you relieve the pain that they don't blame you for, then you create delight. So in any case, you want to make sure you understand what's that expectation that the customer has. Because if you haven't met their expectation, if your intent was not aligned with your expectation, then generally you have what we call an insight gap. Meaning, you came up with a vision, and part of your vision was no doubt that the customer would love the experience, but it's not what happened because you failed to understand the customer well enough. And that's what we call the insight gap, even if you executed it perfectly. And in the book, again, there's a lot of research techniques to try to make sure you understand what the customer's needs, points of pain, expectations are. And ultimately then, difference between the expectation the customer had and the actual experience the customer had, well, that is the fundamental challenge here, because that is the satisfaction gap. If the customer's expectation is totally aligned with their experience, well, then you've done it perfectly, right? You've had an intent that was aligned with their expectation, and you executed it perfectly, and therefore the experience and the expectation are merged into one, beautiful, amazing customer experience. So when everything goes right, all of these circles converge into one circle. The expectation, the intent, and the experience are all exactly the same. The farther apart they are, the more gap you have, and then it's just important to really understand where's the gap. Because if you launched a product that we'll stick with our same example here, if it had been perfectly executed, the customer would have loved it. But it wasn't perfectly executed, and so the customers didn't love it. Well, then you know what to do. You got to improve the execution. right? And the next version needs to fix those problems. But if you executed something that the customer still didn't love, and it wasn't an execution problem, it was an insight problem, well, then you need to think differently about the product. You need to make sure you understand the customer. It's not about improving the execution. It's about changing the concept, changing the intent, basically, to be closer to the customer's expectation and then re-executing. And by the way, you can have some of both, right? It's not always, well, was it all insight or was it all execution? Sometimes there are certain aspects of a product that were good from an expectation or from an insight perspective, but failed in execution. And there are other aspects of a product that, the execution was wrong. Some aspects could have been wrong for both. You had both the wrong idea and you executed it poorly, could be. And of course, there could be parts of your product that you got completely right. That aspect, you had the right idea and you executed it well, but it may not be enough because that's only one part of the product. If the product detects the printer and figures out exactly which printer you have, but then the process of trying to order the toner itself doesn't work properly, well, then you still probably have an unhappy customer. So you may need to take that experience and break it down into chunks, and you may find that as you apply this model, you get a different result for one part of the process versus another. So anyway, that is how to use the execution gap model. We use it all the time. Very, very useful. Simple, right? Conceptually simple, but it just gives you the discipline of separating your thinking between the intent, the expectation, the experience, making sure you really know, right? Because there's nothing worse than going, well, the product wasn't successful. I wonder what was wrong. And someone says, well, maybe it was the marketing. And someone else says, no, it was because you didn't include this one feature that I always thought we should have. And someone else says, no, I think the instructions were unclear. And someone else says, well, customers never really wanted this anyway. And everyone's just sort of arguing about it. And who the hell knows, right? How do you begin to figure it out? Well, that's what this model is about. Instead of just guessing and then taking another blindfolded throw of a dart, hoping that this time you get a product that customers love, use this simple high-level tool to start to break apart, to understand where you might have gone wrong and, iterate, because success is always a result of iteration. Rarely do you hit the bullseye the first time, even if you're not blindfolded, right? You have to learn from each iteration of a product, apply a model like this, and tweak it and improve it going forward. So that's the execution gap model. Hopefully that's useful for you. I hope you've been enjoying reading the book and that you enjoy the rest of the book. Thanks for listening.